Hello. Today I'd like to talk about an issue which affects many of us, especially as we get older, which is a tendency to gain weight. Firstly, I'd like to say that my interest in this topic stems from a health perspective. We know that visceral adiposity, which means weight that we carry around the middle, that those fat cells are metabolically active. They secrete inflammatory molecules which start a process of inflammation in the body, which happens throughout the body and predisposes towards diseases such as cardiovascular disease. We know that an increase in waist circumference relative to hip circumference, in other words, extra weight around the middle, is a risk factor for developing cardiovascular disease. I'd like to look at the factors involved. If we understand what is driving weight gain, we know what to do about reversing that process. Many of us find that when we were younger, it was quite easy to lose weight. If we gained a little bit over Christmas or over holidays, all we needed to do is eat a bit less, exercise a bit more. Before we knew it, the weight just dropped off. But as we get older, this just doesn't seem to happen. Once we gain those few extra kilos, they stubbornly remain. And this is because there are some hormonal processes in the body which work against us. The first is insulin resistance. As I've been talking about in previous videos, if we eat a diet very high in refined carbohydrates and sugar over time, because there is an increase in our blood sugar levels, the body lowers blood sugar by secreting insulin. Insulin is the molecule which binds to a receptor on the surface of the cell, like a key fitting into a lock and opening up a channel for glucose to go into the cell. However, if insulin levels remain high over time, the body becomes resistant to the action of insulin. And the problem with that is that insulin is an anabolic hormone, which means it builds up tissue. If blood sugar remains elevated and it cannot get into muscle cells, for example, to be used as energy, it has to go somewhere, and it is then stored in fat cells as fat to act as a future source of energy in lean times. Of course, those lean times never come, and so over time, we tend to gain more and more weight. The second factor is cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. It's secreted when we perceive that we are under stress, which could be physical or emotional or mental stress. And our modern lifestyle is just set up for us to experience stress, the stress of growing older, of financial responsibilities, of taking care of children, of taking care of our parents, just day-to-day work stresses, driving, all of this adds up. The body doesn't discriminate between an actual immediate threat and our perception of a situation as stressful. We secrete the same hormones in our body. Now, cortisol is another anabolic hormone. Anabolic means building up tissue. The problem with cortisol is that it causes the deposition of fat around the middle, and at the same time, it causes wasting of muscles. So this is a well-known side effect of people who are on cortisone treatment. Other side effects, for example, are high blood pressure, poor skin wound healing, a whole host of side effects from permanently elevated cortisol. So what happens is we lose muscle tone in our arms, our legs, and so forth. This creates an additional problem because our muscles are necessary for glucose uptake. That is where energy is used, is burned up. So if we lose, and it's a big problem as we grow older, because that process is to some extent a natural part of aging. We lose muscle mass, and so we become less efficient at regulating our blood sugar levels. And that's going to compound the problem with insulin resistance again. The third factor here is sleep. If we don't get sufficient sleep, three things happen. The first is that the part of our brain which has to do with impulse control, our executive functioning, is less efficient. And so we are more at the mercy of our impulses, which means it's much more difficult for us to resist temptation. The second thing is that a hormone in the body called ghrelin goes up. And ghrelin is our hunger hormone. If levels of ghrelin go up, we perceive that we are actually hungry. And the third problem with lack of sleep is that we become more insulin resistant and our blood sugar levels shoot up and crash. And between those three factors, if we don't get enough sleep, it's a perfect storm for us to reach for the donut and reach for the muffin. We have very little self-control left, and our hormones are working against us. Exercise has the opposite effect to all of these above factors. When we exercise, the channel on the surface of the cells, which is opened up by insulin, works. That channel opens up more quickly. So our sensitivity to insulin increases, which of course makes sense, because when we exercise, we need to get the glucose inside our muscle cells to be able to burn it up, to move or run or whatever we need to do. There is a provision with exercise, though, which is that excessive exercise will be perceived as stressful by the body. And if that happens, our levels of adrenaline and cortisol go up, and that's counterproductive in terms of weight loss. So you will often see, I'm sure you know somebody who exercises very, very hard, extremely fit, but actually suffers from muscle wasting in the extremities and carry a bit of a spare tire around their middle. A lot of cyclists are like that. People who push very hard find it difficult to lose the weight around the middle, and that's because of the action of cortisol. Their body is actually perceiving their level of effort as a stress. So moderate exercise within a certain band, and this will vary from person to person depending on your genetics, your level of fitness and so forth, there's a golden band to aim for, which is 90% of the time to stay within a zone in which you can converse easily. So you're not so out of breath that you cannot talk to someone that you're exercising with. That sort of level. You're not completely out of breath. You're not pushing yourself over the brink. Now, there's a lot of talk about high intensity interval training, which is all well and good, especially when you're younger. But especially for women, as we get older, we have to be careful around not overdoing the exercise level. In fact, often I would advise my patients to do exercise which they actually find enjoyable. And the reason for that is when we relax, when we do something in nature, when we walk on the beach, or we enjoy something as pleasurable, that activates a part of our nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system, which counteracts the effect of cortisol. So there will be, depending on your health status and your genetics, the level of appropriate exercise is going to be different for each of us. And we must remember what the aim is, and the aim is to promote health. There's no point in pushing ourselves so hard that we are actually becoming unhealthy in the process. There's a second thing that exercise does, which is very positive, which is quite independently from this mechanism of insulin opening up the channel. Exercise by itself opens up a second set of channels on the surface of cells. So even in someone who is insulin resistant or does not make enough insulin, they are still able to control their blood sugar levels simply by exercising more. And again, it doesn't need to be strenuous. It could be walking briskly, just perhaps for a longer time. And the last factor which comes into play with weight loss, of course, is genetics. Some of us are more resistant to the effects of exercise. In other words, we don't tend to lose weight so easily for the same level of exercise as the next person. We also could naturally crave foods, naturally have a problem with appetite control, even a craving for the wrong foods, very fatty foods. So, and there's a third thing, which is that our fat could be more or less inflammatory depending on our genetics. In other words, our exercise program is a highly individualized it's highly individualized for each of us. There is no one size fits all exercise program. What you often hear as, so many minutes for so many times a week and so on, that is based on broad population-based studies. It may not account for your personal situation. It would also be affected, for example, if you are battling with a chronic illness, then you have to be careful not to exercise too much. So in summary, those factors are going to be the factors that are going to influence how easily we gain or lose weight are going to be genetics, so we have to account for that. Our insulin resistance, therefore it would be important to control this area by eating a diet low in processed foods, low glycemic index, low glycemic load foods, which is low refined foods, not a lot of flour, not a lot of sugar, cutting out the junk foods. By managing our stress, that's extremely important. By ensuring that we sleep enough and that we get enough rest and enjoyment every day to activate the parasympathetic part of our nervous system. So all of those factors come into play. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to catching up with you